Being whisked away from an army of swarming bloods, you land at the Maelstrom, the beginning of the madness of Deathwing encounter. Strap in, because this requires a decent amount of strat-splaining. I have to explain the platforms before this fight even begins so you understand what buffs you were acquiring and what you were losing. You're positioned on the third platform as the fight begins. You get the buff from every platform until you complete that platform, then it goes away. From left to right, 20% increased health, with a mechanic counter that kills the blistering tentacles for you and reduces the damage of corrupted bloods. Next over, 20% haste to everybody. A time pocket on the center of the platform that prevents the elementium bolt from landing instantly, giving you time to kill it before it makes contact. That also slows the attack and casting speed of anything within it. Next over, increased healing by 20%. An on-demand extra action that prevents 50% damage for 2.5 seconds, every 30 seconds. Next over, 20% increased damage, and a proc on attack that does 6 yards of AoE damage. That is 2k arcane. Understanding the platforms, whichever platform the most people are on is the platform Deathwing will decide to assault the aspect of. You will take raid damage after damaging a limb tentacle down to 90%. At the back of the platform, this is the assault on the aspect, is a giant tentacle called a mutated corruption. If there is no player in melee range, it'll do its own cast to impale the aspect. If it kills the aspect, it is a wipe. You want your raid to be spread around this in a quarter circle. This is a very narrow crushing ability. It's a bar-shaped frontal that affects a 5-yard wide range that spans out to the edge of the platform. This is to reduce the amount of people getting hit by crush. You want your melee to be in max melee range. It does an impale ability. This does giga damage to whoever is the closest to it. This can only be reduced by damage taken reduction abilities. Tanks need the chunk if they don't have the Ysera buff. Alternatively, classes with cheat death, dispersion, Cauterize can be coaxed into taking this by removing everyone out of melee range as the impale is about to be cast. But it's finicky to make it work, because generally they cannot survive melee strikes, and it requires coordination from your raid, your tank, and their positioning to make that work. Ideally, your tanks are just goated. Zug strats, you might incorporate this for solo tanking. In the midst of this tentacle being active, you will have 1 of 2 corrupting parasites applied to someone in your raid. After their debuff falls off, it places an enemy in their spot that does a 10-yard AoE damage upon being birthed. It'll do a 10-second cast. If it is not killed, it'll do damage equal to 10% of its health to the entire raid. The first one you want to place near the tentacle that is assaulting the aspect. The second one you want to place near the limb tentacle in front of the platform. Also, during the midst of the assaulting tentacle being alive, there will be an elementium bolt that will attempt to land toward the center of the platform. You want to kill this before it lands, if the time buff is active. If there is no time buff, you want to be away from it, as it does damage relative to the distance you are from it when it makes impact. And it will begin pulsating in AoE as long as it is active on the platform. You should have the DPS to kill it before it lands, until Northstorm rebuff is no longer a thing for the platforms that you choose. And also, during the assaulting tentacle's lifespan, the limb tentacle holding Deathwing onto the platform will hemorrhage and cause regenerative bloods to spawn. It will do a stacking debuff to their tank, and every 10 or so seconds when they accumulate full energy, they will regen their health back to full. You will need significant cleave and AoE to bring all of these down before they pop back up. The slinking effect will be a thing until you kill the limb on that side, and they will follow you to other platforms if they have not been killed. With all the ads cleaned up and only the limb tentacle and the regenerative bloods being left alive, every 25% you damage the limb tentacle, it'll spawn blistering tendrils. If you still have the Alex Strauss's platform buff, she will handle those every time. If you do not, you have to individually target these down, as AoE does nothing to them. In the midst of beating down the limb tentacle, Deathwing will begin to cast Cataclysm. If that limb is not destroyed before a minute passes after he begins that cast, it'll wipe the raid. After that limb is done, that aspect on that platform will fight the wraggling bits that are left of that tentacle, and you will not have its buff until the final phase. Plan out what platforms you want to kill in what order so that you have whatever buffs are important for your raid for the length of the fight. You will only be able to keep one permanently. That is the one you decide to choose last. The other ones will dissipate as you complete each platform and progress the fight. You can do the platforms in any order. If you're of the Zug mindset, Calyx, the farthest right, will probably be the last that you stop on. If you value surviving the impale with ease, Ysera's might be the third, the last one that you stop on. If you don't want to coordinate repositioning for the bolt, Northstorm's, the second, might be the last that you stop on. If you just hate dealing with the blistering tentacle mechanic, Alex Strauss's, the far left, might be the last one you stop on. It is completely up to your discretion on what you value as buffs that decides what route you choose on this fight. Whichever last platform you have chosen will be the hardest to do, and it's likely you won't have Alex Strauss assisting killing the ads, or Ysera's buff to help you take the damage. Your second parasite, ideally, you want it placed away from the limb so you're not damaging it prematurely. You might not have the DPS to kill it before it gets cast off, on top of dealing with all the corrupted bloods. So handle all of this before you push the blisterings on the limb tentacle, and then systemically kill each blistering so it reduces the rate damage you're taking. The last platform is making sure everybody survives. You don't want anything being a detriment to your health going into the push. After the last tentacle is dead, Deathwing is at 20% health as each tentacle destroyed removes 20% from his full health pool. In this phase, Deathwing has a passive damaging aura. Deals damage every 2 seconds, I believe it's called Corrupted Blood. Much like Blackhorn, this does more damage the lower his health gets. So on top of the mechanics of the mobs that are going to be following, you have to heal through passive raid-wide damage. That is steadily increasing. Every 5% of his health, he will spawn Congealing Bloods. About a dozen of them. These need to be slowed and killed post-haste. You want to time his 5% intervals of health when there are no other adds up. So you have complete focus and slowing effects if you're going the Fan of Knives route with crippling, or Hunter's Traps if you have the deeps, to kill these things before they touch him, because if they do, they regenerate 1% of his health. And once he goes over another 5%, it's a feedback loop. He will spawn more. Do not let him hit 5% intervals forward, only going in a decreasing fashion. The scary mobs are Elementium Fragments. They do 200k unresistible physical damage to random people upon cast completion. You will need Ysera's buff to survive this. They are of the utmost priority in kill order. There are 8 in total, in 25, 3, and 10. Elementium Terror spawn in packs of 2. They need to be tanked and they add a stacking debuff to those tanks. These are second in priority to kill. As I stated, Congeals spawn in a dozen every 5% health. Though these are of utmost priority to end, you want to time those 5% intervals when everything else is down, as the other 2 alternative mobs will body your raid if left unchecked. Continue this song and dance for 4 waves until it reaches 1% and you win. You could probably leave the last tank ads up. That's fine to secure a push. I wonder why I couldn't find any footage on Deathwing in the PTR. Looks like I had to make my own world of Warcraft. As always, thank you for watching. Shout out to my Patreons, links to the things and stuff I use, Twitch, Patreon, Coffee, and I will see you again soon. TM.